He was hired to clean up the trash. But when a billion-dollar company started falling apart, he was the only one who could take out the garbage. The city of Seattle has a way of holding rain and ambition in perfect, shimmering balance. And in the heart of that city, a 40-story needle of glass and steel pierced the gray sky. Nextcore Dynamics. It was a monument to the future, a temple where algorithms were deities and innovation was the only prayer. Its halls weren't carpeted. They were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the hurried footsteps of those who believed they were building tomorrow. And at the very top of this glass mountain, in a boardroom that felt more like a surgical theater, a queen held court. Her name was Olivia Thorne. To the world, Olivia was a visionary. At 38, she had built Nextcore from a startup into a titan of autonomous technology. Her blonde hair was a flawless twist of platinum. Her suits were blades of dark fabric cut to intimidate, and her eyes missed nothing. She commanded through a potent mixture of fear and awe. But today, the vision was broken, literally. On the massive conference table, surrounded by the stunned silence of 20 executives, sat the reason for the company's impending ruin, the Aura Drive, a revolutionary AI-guided engine, the pulsating heart of their self-driving vehicle fleet. $2 million of precision engineering that now sat there, silent, dark, and mocking. For 6 weeks, it had defied them. It would start, run for exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds, then overheat and die with a cryptic error message. Harmonic disruption detected. 3 teams of the brightest engineers from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech had flown in. They'd run 67 diagnostics. They'd prayed over it, and it had laughed at them. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, stale coffee, and pure panic. $50 million in contracts were evaporating by the second. Olivia Thorne paced. The click of her red-soled heels against the cold marble was a sharp, angry metronome counting down to disaster. I have German investors landing at Boeing Fieldin. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch, a gesture designed to highlight the value of every passing second. 3 hours. They are coming to see this. She gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward the dead engine, her voice dripping with a disgust so potent it felt like a physical thing. What am I supposed to show them? Our collective failure. It was in this pressure cooker of arrogance and fear that the door whispered open, and he stepped inside. Leo Rossi stood frozen in the doorway, a trash bag in one hand, a cleaning cart behind him. He was a man built into the background of this place. For 3 years, he'd moved through these hallways, a ghost in a blue janitor's uniform. He knew every scuff mark on the floor, every coffee stain on the counter, the exact side the elevator made at 2 a.m. His callous hands were better acquainted with the weight of a mop than the touch of a keyboard. His official title was Technical Facilities Consultant. Everyone called him the Janitor. He'd meant to be in and out, invisible as always. But the meeting was still going. He'd misjudged the timing. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled to him, not with recognition, but with the irritation you'd show a fly that had buzzed into a sealed room. He was an inconvenience, a smudge on their perfect, broken picture. Olivia Thorne stopped her pacing. Her gaze, cold and assessing, landed on him. It was a look that had made venture capitalists break into a sweat. "God," she said, her voice slicing through the quiet. "Can you not smell that? It's like a garage in here." Leo said nothing. He just stood there, the trash bag held in his hands like an offering to the wrong gods. She took a step toward him, then another. Her Louis Vuitton heels clicked a verdict against the floor. She walked right up to him, so close he could smell the sharp, citrusy notes of her perfume cutting through the scent of motor oil that always seemed to linger on his clothes. She looked him up and down, a predator examining prey it had no intention of eating, only torturing. "Here's a deal. Maintenance boy," she said, the title a deliberate, venomous slap. She snapped her fingers inches from his face. "You fix this $2 million paperweight that every genius I employ can't figure out, and I'll marry you right here on this conference table." A few nervous titters were quickly suffocated by the room's tension. Her smile was a razor blade. "And when you fail, and you will, security will escort you out of this building. Permanently." The room fell so silent Leo could hear the hum of the server racks 5 floors below. He could feel the heat of every stare, the weight of their judgment. He saw the engineers, with their 6-figure salaries and their Ivy League degrees, looking at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. This was it, the ultimate dismissal, a bet made with her entire reputation, wagered on the certainty of his failure. In that moment, Leo wasn't Janitor. He wasn't even Leo Rossi. He was an object lesson, a prop in Olivia Thorne's theater of cruelty, meant to remind everyone in the room what happened to those who didn't belong. But what Olivia Thorne didn't know, what she couldn't possibly see, was that the man standing before her, smelling of motor oil and holding a bag of trash, had been listening to the song of broken engines his entire life, and he already knew what was wrong with hers. The silence that followed Olivia Thorne's challenge was a living thing, thick and heavy. It was broken by the soft, almost apologetic sound of the door clicking shut as Leo retreated, pulling his cleaning cart back into the hallway. The spell was broken. The executives shifted in their chairs, suddenly very interested in the grain of the mahogany table. The spectacle was over, and the cold, hard reality of their failure rushed back in. Olivia turned her back on the door, as if dismissing Leo had solved one tiny fraction of her problem. She placed her palms flat on the table, leaning over the silent Aura Drive engine. "Where were we?" she asked, her voice crisp, erasing the previous moment from the official record. "Ah, yes, our collective professional obituaries." This was NextScore's culture. It was a place that worshipped at the twin altars of innovation and ambition, but the sermons were all about fear. Fear of failure, fear of falling behind, and most of all, fear of Olivia Thorne. She had built this empire not with inspiration, but with intimidation. Her morning briefings were less about collaboration and more about assigning blame. The coffee cups that accumulated on the conference tables were like geological layers, marking the progression of her rage. She believed that pressure created diamonds, and so she applied it relentlessly to everyone around her. And the source of all the pressure, the reason the entire building seemed to be holding its breath, was an inert piece of machinery on the table. The Aura Drive was a beautiful, complex monster. It wasn't just an engine. It was the promise of a revolution. It was supposed to power their fleet of self-driving delivery trucks with a 93% efficiency rate, a number that would make every other automotive company in the world weep. It represented 3 years of development, 47 patents, and the collective ego of Silicon Valley's brightest. Now, it represented a $67 million hole that was getting deeper every day. The engineering team, led by a sleep-deprived MIT graduate named Marcus Brooks, had become ghosts in their own right. They haunted the lab, their faces lit by the blue glow of error messages they couldn't decipher. They spoke in hushed tones about recursive loops and harmonic feedback, their theories growing more desperate and outlandish with each passing day. "Maybe it's the building's magnetic field?" one had suggested, only to be met with a withering stare from Olivia. "Perhaps the AI has developed a consciousness and is unhappy?" another ventured, immediately wishing he hadn't. They were brilliant, every one of them. Their resumes were impeccable. Their IQs were stratospheric. But they were looking at the problem through a keyhole of code and theory. They were trying to talk to the machine in a language of algorithms, and the machine wasn't listening. Meanwhile, Leo Rossi moved through the aftermath of their long nights. While the engineers finally went home to grab a few hours of fitful sleep, he would push his cart into the boardroom. The silence at 3 a.m. was different from the tense silence of the day. It was a blanket, soft and complete. The only light came from the city glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting silver lines on the polished floor. And in the quiet, he would look at the Aura Drive. He wasn't supposed to. He was supposed to empty the trash, wipe the table, and move on. But he couldn't help it. To him, the engine wasn't a symbol of corporate failure. It was a patient in a coma, and scattered across the table, sometimes hastily shoved into folders, were its medical charts, the blueprints and technical schematics. Leo's eyes, tired from long hours, would trace the lines and numbers. His mind, trained in a different school than the Ivy League engineers, saw a different story. He noticed things. He saw that the core mechanical components were manufactured in Stuttgart, Germany. The specifications were all in clean, precise metric measurements. Millimeters, Newton meters of torque. But the AI calibration software, the brain meant to control this German engineer body, was written right here in Seattle. The code was littered with imperial measurements. Inches, pounds per square inch. A tiny, almost insignificant conversion error. A rounding difference of a fraction of a millimeter. To the engineers staring at lines of code, it was invisible. To a man who had spent his life understanding how physical things fit together, it screamed. One night, he'd even mentioned it. Not to Olivia. Of course. Heaven forbid. He'd been collecting coffee cups from the lab, where Marcus Brooks' team was burning the midnight oil. Sounds like it's fighting itself, Leo had murmured, almost to himself, as a particularly grating whine came from the engine on a test run. Marcus had looked up from his screen, his eyes bloodshot. What did you say? Leo had immediately shrunk back, wiping his hands on his uniform. Nothing, sir. Just the sound. It's uneven, like it's out of rhythm. Marcus had stared at him for a second too long, then snorted, turning back to his screen. It's a harmonic disruption. We know. The software can't find the resonant frequency. Now, unless you got a degree in advanced acoustical engineering in that pocket, let us work. Leo had nodded, collected the rest of the cups, and left. He didn't have that degree. He had something else. He had the memory of his grandfather's voice in a dusty Detroit garage, saying, "Listen, Leo, every engine has its own song. You just got to learn how to hear it." The Aura Drive song was a scream of dissonance, and he was perhaps the only one in the entire glass tower who was listening. The elevator descended from the rarefied air of the executive floor, carrying Leo Rossi back down to his reality. The door slid open not onto polished marble, but onto scuffed linoleum. The hum here wasn't from servers, but from industrial cleaning supplies and the distant mechanical groan of the laundry room. The scent of Olivia Thorne's perfume was replaced by the sharp, clean smell of bleach. He pushed his cart into the janitorial closet, a small, windowless room that was his true domain. Hooks held his spare uniforms. Shelves were lined with solvents, trash bags, and spare parts of things that broke but weren't important enough for the real maintenance crew. This was where the illusion of next score perfection was painstakingly maintained by hand. He sat on a small stool, the adrenaline from the boardroom finally receding, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in its place. He looked at his hands. They were good hands. Strong. The calluses weren't from holding a pen at a prestigious university. They were from griping a mop handle, from wrestling with a stubborn floor buffer, from a lifetime of real, physical work. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was in Seattle. He was in Detroit. The year was 1998. The air wasn't clean. It was thick with the smell of gasoline, rust, and hope. The garage on 8 Mile Road was his cathedral. Its high windows were stained with dust, letting in shafts of light that illuminated dancing motes of metal shavings. And in the center, under the hood of a Chevrolet Caprice that 3 other mechanics had given up on, was his grandfather, Antonio Rossi. Antonio was a sculptor, but his medium was steel and grease. At 70 years old, his hands were a map of a life spent solving puzzles that no one else could. He had been one of the first Italian foremen at the Chrysler plant, a man who earned respect not with words, but with an undeniable, profound competence. "Leo, Viennica," his grandfather's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Come, listen." Young Leo, 12 years old with skinned knees and eyes full of wonder, would press his ear against the engine block as his grandfather turned the key. The motor would cough, sputter, and die. "You hear?" Antonio would say, his voice low and gravelly. "That hesitation? That is not the carburetor. That is the timing. The heart is out of rhythm. You fix the heart, you fix the car. The computer tells you nothing. Your ears? They tell you everything." He taught Leo to diagnose problems through sound, through touch, through smell. A faint ticking could be a loose valve. A specific vibration through the steering wheel could mean an unbalanced tire. The scent of burning oil versus burning coolant told 2 completely different stories. These weren't skills from a textbook. They were a language, passed down from a man who believed machines had souls. "The world will look at you, Leo," his grandfather said one afternoon, his hand resting on a perfectly purring engine. "They will see the dirt under your nails first. They will see the name that ends with a vowel. They will think they know what you can do. But the engine," he patted the warm block, "the engine does not care. It only responds to someone who understands its song. You remember that. You show them by fixing what they cannot." The memory faded, leaving Leo in the silent closet. He had shown them. He'd gotten into a good community college, acing every mechanical and electrical engineering course. His professors were amazed. One, a former Boeing engineer, had pulled him aside. "You have a gift, Leo, an intuition. Don't let it go to waste." But life doesn't care about gifts. It cares about bills. His father, a kind man with the same mechanic's hands, had gotten sick. The diagnosis was swift and brutal. The treatments were longer and more brutal. The insurance covered some, but not enough. Not nearly enough. The choice was simple. It was an equation with only one possible answer. Transfer to a 4-year university meant loans, meant time away from home, meant his father facing the fight alone. So Leo chose sacrifice. He quit school. He worked, days at an auto parts store, nights at a quick lube shop, and eventually the overnight cleaning shift at the shiny new NextCore tower. The pay was steady. It covered the medical bills. It was a numbers game, and the numbers said his dream was a luxury he could not afford. His studio apartment was a shrine to a life that could have been. Textbooks on automotive engineering and AI integration were stacked next to cans of soup, salvaged engine parts, a fuel injector, a small circuit board, sat on his kitchen table like artifacts. After his shifts, when the world was asleep, he would read. He took online courses. He kept the language his grandfather taught him from getting rusty. He saw the irony every day. He pushed his cart past the young engineers at NextCore, their conversations filled with theoretical concepts he understood intuitively. They were playing with simulations. He had fixed the real thing. They saw a janitor. They never saw the man who, just hours before, had been studying journal articles on harmonic resonance in internal combustion engines. He was the most educated janitor in Seattle and the most invisible. He finished his shift as the first rays of sun hit the NextCore tower. He rode the bus home, watching the city wake up. He checked on his father, who was sleeping fitfully, then lay on his own bed, staring at the ceiling. Olivia Thorne's words echoed in his mind. "Maintenance boy." The humiliation burned, a hot coal in his chest. But underneath the burn was something else. A cold, solid certainty. He knew what was wrong with the Aura drive. He'd known for weeks. It was a ghost in the machine, a tiny miscommunication between its German body and its American brain. A problem of arrogance, of two brilliant teams never truly talking to each other, each assuming their way was perfect. He saw it all so clearly. But who would ever listen to the janitor? He closed his eyes, and his grandfather's voice was there, as clear as it had been 20 years ago in that Detroit garage. "The engine does not care about your circumstances, Leo. It just wants someone who understands its language." The question wasn't if he could fix it. The question was, did he have the courage to speak up, knowing it would likely cost him everything? The next 2 days at NextCore were a slow-motion avalanche. The tension, once confined to the executive floor, began to seep through the entire building, a fine, corrosive dust of anxiety that settled on everything. Leo moved through it, a silent witness to the escalating chaos. His round became a tour of a company coming undone. He emptied the trash in the engineering lab and found it filled with the wrappers of expensive energy drinks and the husks of failed prototypes. The whiteboards were a frantic spiderweb of equations and theories, each one crossed out with more violence than the last. Marcus Brooks was often there, his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped in a posture of pure defeat. The team had started blaming each other. Leo heard the sharp, whispered arguments. "You said the thermal calibration was within tolerance." "Well, your software patch made it worse." The brilliant minds were turning on each other, their confidence shattered. He cleaned the break room and heard the whispers of the junior staff. The rumors were flying. Massive layoffs. The company being sold. The Germans were already pulling out. The stock price was tanking. People looked at their security badges not as access cards, but as countdown timers to unemployment. And through it all, moving like the eye of the hurricane, was Olivia Thorne. Leo saw her sometimes, striding through the halls, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, furious snarl. Her perfect composure was cracking. He'd once entered a conference room to find a shattered coffee mug on the floor, brown liquid dripping off the edge of the table like blood. The pressure was changing her, sharpening her edges into something truly dangerous. The German delegation arrived on a Wednesday morning under a blanket of Seattle drizzle. Leo watched from a second-floor window as 3 black Mercedes Maybachs, sleek and silent as sharks, glided up to the entrance. Men in impeccably tailored suits emerged, their faces grim and unsmiling. They were led by Klaus Richter, a man with a spine so straight and a gaze so direct he seemed to cut through the gray day. And with them was a woman Leo recognized from the engineering journals he read at night, Dr. Elena Silva. She was shorter than the men, older, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation that was legendary. She had designed power systems for spacecraft and revolutionized electric vehicle batteries. Her presence was a verdict. This wasn't just a business meeting. It was a technical autopsy. The air in the building seemed to get even thinner. Olivia's smile, when she greeted them in the lobby, was a terrifying thing. All teeth and no warmth. The entourage was whisked upstairs, and the waiting began. The scheduled demonstration was for 2 p.m. At 1:58 p.m., Leo was mopping a spill near the boardroom doors, trying to be invisible. The doors were slightly ajar. He heard the low hum of conversation, the confident tones of Marcus Brooks beginning his presentation. At 2:14 p.m., he heard it. It started as a low groan, a sound of mechanical distress he knew all too well. Then came a sharp pop, followed by the acrid, unmistakable scent of burning electronics and the sweet, sickly smell of overheating coolant. A chorus of alarmed shouts erupted from the room. And then the hiss. The entire floor's fire suppression system activated, dumping a cloud of white chemical powder from the ceiling vents. The boardroom doors burst open, and a wave of executives and engineers stumbled out, coughing, sputtering, their expensive suits and dresses dusted in white. They looked like ghosts, pale, shocked, and utterly defeated. Through the chaos, Leo saw Klaus Richter and Dr. Silva. They stood apart from the others, untouched by the panic. Richter merely brushed a speck of powder from his sleeve, his expression one profound disappointment. Dr. Silva was writing in a small leather notebook, her face a mask of clinical observation. The verdict was clear, and it was fatal. An hour later, an emergency all-hands meeting was called. The main auditorium was packed, a sea of nervous faces. The air hummed with a low frequency of pure fear. Leo stood at the very back, near the exit signs, his blue janitor's uniform a splash of color in a monochrome room of dread. Olivia Thorne took the stage. The woman who was always a blade of perfect composure was frayed. A strand of her platinum hair had escaped its bun. There was a slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted the microphone. "As you are all aware," she began, her voice stripped of its usual venom, leaving only a cold, hard reality, "we face an existential challenge." She didn't need to name the Aura Drive. Its failure hung over the room like a shroud. She spoke of lost contracts, of reputations in tatters, of 6 weeks of failure. And then she got to the point. Her eyes, cold and sharp, scanned the crowd. "Effective immediately, we will begin aggressive cost reduction measures." The phrase was corporate, sterile, but everyone knew what it meant. Jobs, lots of them. We will be eliminating roles that are not essential to our core mission of solving this crisis. Her gaze, hunting for a sacrifice, a symbol to offer up to the gods of corporate failure, swept across the audience. It passed over the terrified interns, the anxious marketers, the exhausted engineers. And then it stopped. It landed on Leo. He felt it like a physical touch. The room's attention, all 200 pairs of eyes, followed her gaze until it found him, standing alone at the back. The janitor, the most non-essential person in the entire company. In that moment, he wasn't a man. He was an idea. He was the embodiment of dead weight. He was the easiest cut, the most visible symbol of the purge she was about to unleash. He saw the calculation in her eyes. Firing him would be a show of strength, a message to everyone else. He saw his father's face. He saw the medical bills on his kitchen table. He saw the future evaporating. And something inside him, something built from his grandfather's lessons and his own quiet dignity, finally snapped. His hand went up. It was a small movement, but in the silent, terrified auditorium, it was like a lightning strike. "Ma'am," his voice, and used to addressing crowd, was quieter than he intended. The microphone picked it up and amplified it, sending his single word echoing through the deathly quiet room. I think the problem might be in the harmonic calibration, not the software." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop onto the plush carpet. And then, every single head in the room, including Klaus Richter's and Dr. Elena Silva's, turned to look at the janitor who had just spoken out of turn. He had crossed the line. There was no going back. The point of no return had been reached, and he had taken the first, terrifying step over the edge. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The silence in the auditorium was so profound it had its own weight, its own pressure, pushing down on everyone. 200 people stared at the man in the blue janitor's uniform, his hand still slightly raised, his words hanging in the air like smoke. Harmonic calibration. It was such a specific, such a technical term. It sounded absurd coming from his mouth. It was like a child explaining quantum theory. Then the spell broke. A snort of laughter came from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. It was quickly choked off, but the damage was done. The tension shattered into a wave of nervous murmurs. People shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, embarrassed for him. But Olivia did not laugh. Her frayed composure snapped back into place, sharp and cold. The surprise on her face melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated opportunity. She had been handed a gift, a perfect public scapegoat. A slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. She stepped away from the podium, her heels clicking with renewed purpose on the stage. Well, she said, her voice a silken trap. The microphone amplified every condescending syllable. It seems our facilities consultant has an opinion on advanced harmonic engineering. She began to walk slowly down the steps from the stage, moving through the aisle like a shark through water. The crowd parted before her. "Let me make sure I understand," she continued, her eyes locked on Leo. "Jamal Washington. No. Wait, Leo Rossi, the man who ensures our trash cans are empty and our floors are shiny, believes he has identified the problem that has eluded our best and brightest for 6 weeks." She stopped a few feet from him. She was close enough that he could see the fine lines of stress around her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Since you're so remarkably confident," she said, her voice dropping into a theatrical whisper that the mic caught perfectly, "let's give you a chance to prove it." She turned to address the room, spreading her arms wide, including everyone in her spectacle. "Here's the deal, Leo," she announced. "You will come up to the executive boardroom. You will stand in front of our investors, our board, our entire company, and you will fix our $2 million engine. You will have—" She made a show of checking her diamond watch. 2 hours. 2 hours to succeed where MIT failed. She turned back to him, her smile a razor blade. "And if by some miracle you succeed, which we all know you won't, I will personally promote you to senior engineering consultant, a 6-figure salary, stock options, the whole package." The audience gasped. It was an obscenely generous offer, so over the top that it was clearly not meant to be real. It was the setup. "But when you fail," she said, her voice hardening, the venom returning, "and you will fail, you will be terminated. Immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and I will personally make sure that every tech firm from here to San Jose knows the story of the janitor who arrogantly tried to play engineer and destroy the company's future." She snapped her fingers. On cue, the 2 security guards stationed at the side doors took a step forward, their hands resting on their belts. The message was clear and brutal. This was no longer a meeting. It was an execution. But then, A new voice cut through the drama. It was calm, authoritative, and carried the weight of genuine expertise. I will serve as a technical witness. Dr. Elena Silva was standing. She closed her leather notebook with a definitive click. All eyes swung to her. This demonstration requires neutral oversight, she stated, her gaze sweeping over Olivia before landing on Leo. Her look wasn't cruel or kind. It was analytical, to ensure fairness and technical accuracy in the evaluation. Olivia's triumphant expression flickered. This was not part of her script. Dr. Silva's involvement legitimized a farce, turned it into a real test. Klaus Richter gave a single, sharp nod. This is acceptable. We are curious to see this American approach to problem solving. His tone was dry, but his eyes were intensely curious. The circus had officially been hijacked. Olivia, realizing she had to adapt, seized a new narrative. Fine, she said, her voice tight. But we're live streaming this, company-wide, on all our social channels. Let's give our followers a real-time look at innovation in action. It was a final, nasty twist. She wasn't just going to fire him. She was going to meme him into oblivion. The room erupted into a chaotic buzz. Phones came out. Marketing teams scrambled. The crowd began to move, flowing out of the auditorium and toward the elevators, a wave of bodies carrying Leo with them towards his very public judgment. He didn't move at first. He was rooted to the spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. The immensity of what was happening threatened to crush him. Dr. Silva walked against the tide of people until she stood in front of him. She looked up at him, her sharp eyes searching his. "Young man," she said quietly, for his ears only, "this is a very high-stakes game. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Leo looked past her, at the retreating back of Olivia Thorne, at the faces of the employees already recording him on their phones. He saw his father's medication. He saw his grandfather's garage. He met Dr. Silva's gaze. His voice, when it came, was quieter than hers, but steady. "Ma'am, I've been listening to machines my whole life," he said. "This one's been trying to tell us what's wrong. We just haven't been listening." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Dr. Silva's lips. She gave a slow nod. "Very well," she said, turning to follow the crowd. "Let us see what you can hear." The walk to the executive floor was the longest of Leo's life. The elevator was packed, but a small bubble of space surrounded him. He was now contagious. The condemned man. The boardroom had been transformed. The glass walls were lined with employees pressed against them. Klaus Richter and the German sat at the table like a panel of judges. Techs set up cameras, their lights flooding the room in a harsh, unforgiving glare. In the center of it all, on the vast conference table, sat the Aura drive engine. It looked different now, not like a piece of machinery, but like an altar, and he was the sacrifice about to be laid upon it. Olivia stood by the window, her phone already streaming, a commentator at her own coliseum. Leo stopped at the threshold. He took a deep breath, the scent of bleach and lemon polish from his cart, still clinging to his clothes. Then he stepped into the arena. The lights from the live stream cameras were hot and blinding, carving out a circle of stark reality in the center of the boardroom. Outside the glass walls, a sea of faces pressed in a silent, staring audience to what most believed would be a brutal and short-lived spectacle. Leo stood before the conference table. The Aura drive engine sat in the center, gleaming under the lights, a silent, complex sphinx waiting to deliver its riddle. His tools weren't the calibrated diagnostic laptops or the oscilloscopes the engineers had used. His tools were his hands, his ears, and a lifetime of listening. He ignored the cameras. He ignored Olivia Thorne's icy stare from the corner. He ignored the whispered bets he could almost hear from the crowd outside. He closed his eyes for a second, blocking it all out. He wasn't in a Seattle boardroom. He was back in his grandfather's garage. The smell of oil and metal was the same. He placed his palms flat on the cool metal of the engine block. A murmur rippled through the crowd. What was he doing? Marcus Brooks, from his place in the front row of onlookers, shook his head in disbelief. But Dr. Silva watched, her head tilted. Klaus Richter leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his fingers steepled. They were witnessing a methodology they didn't recognize. Leo's eyes remained closed. He was listening, feeling. The engine was cold and silent, but to him, it was still speaking. He was reading its history and the minute vibrations still trapped in its metal skeleton, remembering the sounds of its distress from the failed tests. After a long moment, he opened his eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a nervous janitor. They were the focused, calm eyes of a diagnostician. "It's fighting itself," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried like a bell. He looked directly at Klaus Richter. "Sir, the core mechanical assembly was manufactured in your Stuttgart facility, correct? To metric specifications." Richter's eyebrows lifted a fraction of a millimeter. "This is correct. Our precision is to hundredths of a millimeter. And the AI calibration," Leo continued, turning his gaze to the bank of dormant diagnostic screens, "was programmed here, in imperial measurements." He let the statement hang there. It was a first thread, and he was pulling it. Olivia let out a short, dismissive laugh. "A conversion error? Our systems handle those calculations automatically. It's a non-issue." Leo didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on Dr. Silva. "Mathematically, yes, but mechanically? 1,000 perfect mathematical conversions can still create a physical reality that's just slightly off. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra where every instrument is tuned to a slightly different standard. They're all almost right, but together they're wrong." He turned back to the engine. "May I?" Dr. Silva nodded. "Proceed." Leo reached over and pressed the ignition sequence. The engine roared to life, the sudden, powerful sound making half the people in the room jump. It settled into a rumble, but Leo's trained ear immediately picked up the discordant note. "Listen," he said, raising his voice over the noise. He pointed to the tachometer as it climbed. "Right there, at 2,800 RPM. Can you hear it? A flutter in the harmonic frequency. The pistons are hitting their optimal rhythm, but the AI's sensors are reading vibrations that don't match what's been told to expect." He moved his hand to the engine block again, feeling its vibrations. "Your engineers have been chasing software ghosts, error codes, and corrupted data. But the problem isn't the code. It's in the harmony. The engine runs for exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds, because that's how long it takes for this tiny mismatch to build into a critical resonance. The system overheats trying to correct for an imperfection that doesn't exist in the physical world, only in the digital expectation." The room was utterly captivated. The dismissive smirks had vanished. The engineers in the crowd were staring, their minds racing, comparing his words to the weeks of dead ends they'd faced. Marcus Brooks was no longer shaking his head. He was frowning, his MIT-trained brain wrestling with the simple, elegant logic of it. Dr. Silva had taken out her fountain pen again and was writing in her notebook, a slight, intense smile on her face. She looked at Leo not as a curiosity, but as a colleague. "The theory is sound," she said, her voice cutting to the engine's rumble. "A minute tolerance differential in physical components could indeed create a cascading synchronization error with an AI calibrated to different standards. Explain your proposed solution." This was it. The first hurdle cleared. They were listening. Now he had to show them he wasn't just a critic. He was a builder. He had moved from the world of theory into the realm of action. He had named the demon. Now he had to slay it. The engine's rumble filled the boardroom, a powerful, living sound that now held the entire audience captive. Leo's words had shifted the atmosphere. This was no longer a public shaming. It was a masterclass. Dr. Silva's question hung in the air, mingling with the scent of heated metal and exhaust. Explain your proposed solution. Leo didn't move toward the complex diagnostic laptops. Instead, he went to the one thing in the room that was truly his maintenance cart. He bypassed the cleaning supplies and reached into a lower compartment, pulling out a small, unassuming metal toolbox. A few engineers exchanged puzzled glances. What could he possibly have in there that they hadn't tried? He opened the box. Inside, nestled in worn foam, wasn't a collection of expensive micro-tools or digital gauges. There were a few well-used wrenches, a set of calipers, and several odd, finely machined metal parts. These were his grandfather's tools, and a few pieces he'd machined himself in the community college workshop, remnant of a dream he'd kept alive in a toolbox. He selected a digital caliper and turned back to the engine. The live-stream camera zoomed in, projecting his every move onto screens across the company and the internet. "The problem isn't a broken part," he said, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the engine's growl. "It's a conversation between two perfectionists who don't realize they're speaking different languages." He began taking measurements with a practiced ease that spoke of 1,000 hours in the garage. He called out numbers, his voice clear over the din. Crankshaft journal. German specs call for 87.63 millimeters. He read the caliper. And it's perfect. 87.63 on the nose. He looked at the diagnostic screen, where the AI's expected value was displayed. But the AI is programmed to expect 3.450 inches, which converts to 87.663 millimeters. He moved to a piston head, piston diameter. Stuttgart manufactured it to 96.04 millimeters, flawless. He glanced at the screen. AI expects 3.781 inches, 96.0374 millimeters. He continued, point by point, measuring connecting rods, camshafts, valve stems. Each time, the story was the same. The German components were machined to a breathtaking, precise perfection, but the American AI software, using imperial conversions, was expecting values that were off by a hair's breadth, a few hundredths of a millimeter. An amount so small it was laughable. An amount so consistent it was catastrophic. "You see," Leo said, straightening up, "mathematically, the conversions are correct, but in the physical world, these tiny differences are not nothing. They accumulate. The AI is constantly making micro-adjustments, trying to force mechanical components into a rhythm that doesn't quite match their physical reality. It's like a conductor insisting the violins are flat when they're perfectly in tune. The orchestra keeps trying to adjust and the music falls apart." The boardroom was silent except for the engine. The engineers, especially Marcus Brooks, were staring at the numbers on the screens, their minds reeling. They had been looking for a single catastrophic failure. A broken chip, a fried circuit. They had missed a ghost in the machine. 1,000 tiny, perfect disagreements. Olivia Thorne had gone very still. The Livestream phone in her hand was forgotten. She was watching the German investors. Klaus Richter was nodding slowly, a look of dawning, grudging respect on his face. He understood precision. He understood the implications. This wasn't a failure of his German engineers or the American programmers. It was a failure of integration, a failure of dialogue. So the solution isn't to reprogram the AI or remachine components, Leo concluded. That would take weeks and cost a fortune. The solution is to give them a translator. He reached back into his toolbox. This time, he pulled out a small, circular piece of metal about the size of a hockey puck. It was unassuming brushed steel, with a pattern of precise perforations drilled into its surface. It looked like a large, heavy washer. "This is a harmonic dampener," he explained. Holding it up, the camera is focused on it. "I machined it myself. The pattern of holes is calculated to alter the resonant frequency of the assembly ever so slightly, to absorb the tiny vibrational discrepancy between what the engine is and what the AI thinks it is." He looked at Olivia, then at the broader audience. "It doesn't change the engine. It doesn't change the code. It just helps them understand each other." The simplicity of it was breathtaking. The engineers had proposed solutions costing millions of dollars and months of work. They had looked for complexity. Leo had looked for harmony, and he was holding the key in his hand. A $50 piece of machined steel against a $2 million problem. The ghost had been found. Now he had to build it a home. All eyes were fixed on the unassuming metal disc in Leo's hand, the harmonic dampener. It looked absurdly simple, almost primitive compared to the complex circuitry and gleaming alloy of the Aura drive. In that moment, it represented the chasm between theoretical genius and practical wisdom. Olivia Thorne found her voice first, a sharp, disbelieving bark that cut to the hum of the engine. "You cannot be serious. You expect us to believe that a washer is a solution to a problem that has cost this company 6 weeks and millions of dollars." "It's not a washer," Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't argue with her. He simply stated a fact. It's a calibrated resonance buffer. And sometimes the most elegant solution is also the simplest. He turned to Dr. Silva. The mounting points are already there. The designers included them for auxiliary damping. They just never needed them until now. Dr. Silva nodded, her expression unreadable. Proceed with the installation. The next 12 minutes were a study in focused silence. Leo moved around the engine with an economy of motion that spoke of a deep, intimate familiarity with machinery. His hands, which Olivia had mocked for smelling of motor oil, now worked with the precise, confident grace of a master craftsman. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need to consult a manual or call for a specific tool. He selected a wrench from his grandfather's toolbox, a well-worn, perfectly balanced tool, and began to work. The click-click-click of the ratchet was a soft counter-rhythm to the engine's persistent rumble. He wasn't just installing a part. He was performing a kind of mechanical surgery, connecting two worlds that had been failing to communicate. The engineers watched, their earlier skepticism giving way to rapt fascination. They saw knowledge in his movements that wasn't taught in any university. It was learned on concrete floors, under the hoods of countless broken machines, passed down from a man who understood that metal had a soul. Marcus Brooks, the MIT team lead, watched Leo's hands, a strange look on his face, a mixture of professional respect and personal humiliation. He had overthought the problem. He had looked for answers in lines of code, in complex algorithms. He had never once considered that the answer might be physical, tangible, something you could hold in your hand. As Leo tightened the final bolt, he placed his hand back on the engine block. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the vibrations travel up his arm. He nodded to himself, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. He straightened up and took a step back. "It's ready." The announcement was anticlimactic. There was no fanfare, no flashing lights, just a janitor wiping his hands on a rag, standing next to a $2 million engine that now had a piece of his own history bolted to its side. The entire sequence had taken less than half of his allotted 2 hours. Klaus Richter checked his platinum watch, his face a mask of Germanic impassivity. Dr. Silva positioned herself at the primary diagnostic monitor, her fingers poised over the keyboard. The live-stream cameras zoomed in on the engine's readouts. The crowd outside the glass wall pressed closer. You could feel the collective holding of breath. This was the moment. Would it be triumph or the most public failure in Silicon Valley history? Olivia Thorne stood frozen by the window, her phone still streaming. Her face was pale. The sheer, audacious confidence Leo had displayed was unnerving. The narrative was slipping from her grasp, and she knew it. Leo looked at Dr. Silva and gave a single nod. "Initiate full operational tests," Dr. Silva commanded, her voice crisp in the silence. The engine's note changed immediately. It wasn't a loud change, but a qualitative one. The harsh, strained undertone, the sound that had plagued it for weeks, was gone, vanished. In its place was a deep, smooth, purring hum. It was the sound of perfect mechanical harmony. The sound of an engine finally, blissfully, at peace with itself. The diagnostic screens, which had for so long been a frantic mess of red error messages and yellow warnings, now glowed a steady, uniform green. Dr. Silva began reading out the data, her voice laced with something akin to awe. Oil pressure steady. Temperature holding at optimal. Harmonic frequency locked. 0 deviation. She looked up from the screen, her eyes finding Leo's. "I am reading 97.3% efficiency. That is beyond theoretical maximum." A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. Beyond maximum? It was impossible. But the screens didn't lie. The engine's song didn't lie. The dreaded 14-minute mark came and went. Then 20 minutes. Then 30. The engine didn't overheat. It didn't shudder. It didn't die. It just ran. Perfectly. Leo had done it. In under 2 hours, with a toolbox of inherited tools and a 50-cent piece of machine steel, he had fixed the unfixable. He hadn't just repaired an engine. He had proven a philosophy. He had given voice to the silent, and in doing so, he had shattered the glass cage of arrogance that had contained him for so long. The rhythm of truth was no longer a faint, ignored vibration. It was a deafening, triumphant hum that filled the room, shaking the very foundations of next-core dynamics. The engine's perfect, resonant hum was the only sound in the boardroom for a full 30 seconds. It wasn't the aggressive roar before, but a deep, contented purr, the sound of a problem solved, of harmony achieved. It was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. Then the spell broke. Klaus Richter was the first to move. He stood up, a single, decisive motion. He didn't applaud. He didn't cheer. He simply began to clap, a slow, measured, deeply respectful applause. The sharp cracks of his palms meeting echoed in the room. The German investors beside him rose and joined in. Their faces etched with a look of professional awe. That was the trigger. The employees pressed against the glass walls erupted. The sound was muffled by the thick panes, but it was unmistakable, a roar of cheers, shouts of disbelief, and spontaneous applause. Phones were raised, recording the historic moment. The live stream comments now a frantic, celebratory blur. Inside the room, Dr. Elena Silva turned from the glowing green diagnostic screens. She looked at Leo, and for the first time, her clinical demeanor cracked, revealing pure, unadulterated admiration. She walked over to him, not as a titan of industry to a janitor, but as one engineer to another. She extended her hand. That, she said, her voice clear and carrying, was a masterclass in diagnostic intuition and elegant engineering. In 40 years, I have rarely seen a problem so complex solved with a solution so simple and effective. She shook his hand firmly. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud. The words landed on Leo with a weight that nearly buckled his knees. He could only nod, a lump in his throat. Klaus Richter approached next. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and approving. Herr Rossi, he said, his English precise. Your methodology was exceptional. You did not see a software ghost or a hardware failure. You saw a conversation that was failing, and you provided the translator. He glanced at his assistant, who was typing furiously. This is the kind of innovative thinking that secures partnerships. Our investment recommendation will be not only confirmed, but increased. We would be honored to have you consult on our European integration program. The room buzzed. An increased investment. A personal invitation. It was more than a victory. It was a coronation. All of this happened around Olivia Thorne. She stood by the window, her phone hanging limply at her side, the live stream forgotten. The screen showed thousands of viewers celebrating the janitor's triumph and eviscerating her leadership. She was not just watching Leo's success. She was watching her own professional immolation. Board member Patricia Brooks, who had been silent throughout, now spoke, her voice cold and formal. This demonstration has been illuminating. It has resolved our technical crisis and secured our German partnership. However, it has also raised serious questions about management practices and personnel evaluation at NextCore. Her eyes swept over Olivia. The board will be convening an emergency meeting to discuss the systematic oversight that allowed this expertise to remain in the background. The word oversight was generous. Everyone knew what she meant. The reckoning had arrived, and it was swift and merciless. Human Resources Director Jennifer Walsh, who had once added laughing emojis to emails mocking Leo, now looked like she might be sick. She was already being pulled aside by a board member, their conversation hushed and urgent. The narrative had completely flipped. Leo was no longer the impudent janitor. He was the brilliant savior. Olivia was no longer the visionary leader. She was the arrogant manager who had nearly sunk her own company by ignoring the talent right under her nose. Dr. Silva turned to address the room. Effective immediately, and using my authority as lead technical consultant, I am approving Leo Rossi's promotion to senior diagnostics engineer. His salary will be adjusted to market value for his demonstrated exceptional skill set. She almost smiled. I believe the offered figure was 6 digits and stock options. The crowd outside the glass cheered even louder. Marcus Brooks stepped forward from the group of engineers. He looked humbled and for the first time respectful. Leo, On behalf of the engineering team, I apologize. We were blind. We'd be grateful for the chance to learn from your approach." Leo looked at the man who had dismissed him days before, now asking for his guidance. He simply nodded. "Everyone looks at the problem from a different angle," he said. "We just need to start listening to each other." The reward was more than a title and a salary. It was respect. It was validation. It was the sight of the entire company, from the interns to the board members, looking at him not with pity or contempt, but with awe. The victory was absolute. The engine purred on, a testament to his triumph. But in the quiet corner of the room, a defeated figure stood by the window, beginning to understand the true cost of her arrogance. The fallout from this day would ripple far beyond the boardroom, and justice, corporate and personal, was only just beginning. 6 months later, the hum within NextCore Dynamics was different. It was no longer the anxious, high-frequency vibration of impending doom, but the steady, productive rhythm of a company reborn. The glass walls, once reflecting fear and hierarchy, now seemed to amplify the light of collaboration. Leo Rossi's new office had a window. It wasn't the corner office Olivia Thorne had once occupied, but it looked out over Seattle's skyline, a view he never tired of. On his desk, next to a state-of-the-art computer, sat 2 items, a framed photograph of his grandfather, Antonio, smiling in his grease-stained coveralls, and a simple, brushed steel harmonic dampener mounted on a small stand. A paperweight, a reminder he was no longer senior diagnostics engineer. He was the head of integrated systems design, leading a new team that blended seasoned software architects with mechanics who, like him, spoke the language of physical machines. The Leo principle was now part of the company's onboarding. Listen to the problem, not just the data. The German partnership had flourished. The first fleet of trucks powered by the perfected Aura drive was navigating the streets of Munich with flawless efficiency. Klaus Richter had personally sent a case of German beer to Leo's team after the first successful month, a gesture that meant more than any stock bonus. One afternoon, Leo was in the newly renovated lab, watching his team, a diverse mix of former janitors, community college grads, and MIT PhDs, work together on a new power cell design. The conversation was a lively, respectful exchange of ideas, a world away from the hushed, fearful arguments of the past. He felt a presence at the door and turned. Olivia Thorne stood there. The change in her was startling. The razor-sharp power suits were gone, replaced by a simple, elegant blouse and slacks. Her famous platinum hair was down, softening her features. The most striking difference was in her eyes. The cold, calculating gleam was gone, replaced by a weary humility. "Lo," she said. Her voice, once a weapon, was now quiet. "Do you have a moment?" He nodded and led her to a small breakout room nearby. She didn't sit. She stood, her arms crossed, not in defiance, but as if holding herself together. "The board's leadership program is thorough," she began, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "Lots of modules on empathetic leadership. Unconscious bias. It's humbling." Leo waited. He felt no triumph, only a quiet curiosity. "I owe you an apology," she said, meeting his gaze directly. The word seemed difficult, but she didn't look away. "A real one, not from the company. From me. I was arrogant. I was cruel. I saw people as assets or liabilities, not as people. I was so busy building a monument that I forgot to build a team." She took a breath. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that yet. But I am asking if you might be willing to offer some advice. Your team has the highest morale and productivity in the company. How did you do it? How do you get them to listen like that?" Leo looked at her for a long moment. He saw not a monster, but a profoundly talented person who had lost her way in the glare of her own ambition. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow, Olivia," he said finally. "The question isn't about what you know. It's about being ready to listen. Really listen. Not to respond, not to judge, but to understand. It's the same thing I did with that engine." He gestured toward the lab, where a quiet murmur of collaboration continued. "They aren't afraid to be wrong here. They're afraid of not learning. That's the culture you have to build. It starts by admitting you don't have all the answers." Olivia nodded slowly, absorbing his words. It was the first lesson in her new education. It wouldn't be her last. Later that day, Leo received an email. It was from the community college where he'd gotten his degree. They wanted him to teach a weekend seminar. Practical diagnostics, bridging the gap between theory and instinct. He smiled and typed his acceptance. That evening, he visited his father. The medical bills were still there, but they were manageable now. He sat by his father's bedside and told him about his day, about Olivia's visit, about the new project. His father, weaker now but with eyes still full of pride, squeezed his hand. "Your grandfather," he whispered. "He would have loved to see this." Leo nodded, his throat tight. "I know." He left the apartment as the sun began to set over the Seattle skyline. He didn't head for the bus stop. He walked, the cool evening air fresh on his face. He passed the towering needle of the next core building, its windows glowing like amber in the twilight. He didn't see a monument to arrogance anymore. He saw a workshop, a place where, finally, the song of the machine and the song of the people inside, they were finding a new, harmonious rhythm. He had gone from invisible to indispensable, from a whisper to a defining voice. And his story was no longer just about fixing an engine. It was a reminder that the most powerful expertise often comes from the most unexpected places, wrapped not in a diploma, but in dedication, in humility, and in the courage to truly listen. And so, the silent genius found his voice, and in doing so, gave a whole company a new song to sing. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who around you is being underestimated? What potential are we missing because we're not really listening? If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales of hidden strength. Thanks for listening. Until next time,